Greetings, all you conjurers and collectors of curiosities, and welcome to the chicken-legged hut. You can call me the Fool. I'm the one on screen setting up this table right now, and in case you missed the warning at the beginning there, I'm doing something today which may disturb some folks. It's a method of preserving organic soft tissue, in this case from a goat. But before I get into all of that, let this be a clear and final warning. I will be processing an animal for preservation in this video. I tried my best to edit out the more graphic parts of this process, but unavoidably, inherently, the content of the video will not be to everyone's taste. What I'm doing is preparing what's called a wet specimen. For the uninitiated, a wet specimen is, as I said, an organic soft tissue, often and in this case a part of an animal, preserved in a fluid which will inhibit decay and bacterial growth. Now that the work surface is set up, I'll be bringing in the remains of our fallen bovid herself. Some of the first questions to come up about this project when I would explain it to people were, where the hell did you get a whole goat? And what are you going to do with it? And when is it going to come out of my freezer so I can have room to put ice cream in there?
Seriously?
The answer to the second question I'll explain as we go, but as for the former, a friend of the channel happens to keep goats. She has, I believe, 20 or so adults and 5 little baby goats as of collecting this from her. So how did it come up? Well, she's aware of the channel and the type of projects we do and are interested in, and told me that she had a juvenile goat that had recently passed away off the main part of her property. She's unsure what caused her to expire, her best bet being that she may have eaten something she shouldn't have. Normally, given the location, she'd leave it to go back to nature and later collect the bones. Cue our conversation. Now, the downside for me is that it was outside for a few days, but never above 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 10 Celsius at the most. I was unsure about the state of decay, but she didn't smell and the eyes were still intact, so I triple bagged the remains and put it immediately into my freezer for 2 days prior to starting here. Again, she didn't smell terrible, but I didn't want to find out the hard way when it thawed out that the innards in particular had decayed to the extent that we'd have some severe odor or a serious mess on our hands. So I decided to process it while it was still fresh from the freezer. Unfortunately, it's unlikely that the pelt is salvageable, despite how good it looks outwardly. It's a bit bigger than I could manage to preserve in its entirety in a single sealed glass container. There's just no way. Instead, I'm just planning on preserving the head and legs from below the lowest joint separately, and the remainder will be allowed to macerate for bone collection at a later date. Now that I've got the goat processed and all of the parts I'm going to need from it, I'm going to clean up this work surface a bit and prepare to turn them into wet specimens. There is some debate in the community about what the proper methodology should be for preserving a wet specimen, but I'll give you a little history lesson and share what I learned in my research on the topic. This method of preserving animal specimens goes back to the 17th century and is frequently attributed to a scientist from Amsterdam named Frederik Ruysch, who lived from 1638 to 1731. The practice was traditionally used for teaching and research, especially in taxonomic science. It's still in use today, especially for studying rare specimens and in the study of pathologies, although depending on the use and where the specimen is processed, using different chemicals. Some companies even produce their own proprietary chemicals. So prior to starting, I got on Reddit to ask the taxidermy community what methods of preservation they'd recommend. I got some valuable insight that did color my decision to make wet specimens, specifically on the topic of decay. The most common recommendation, given the conditions and the time that elapsed from its expiration until collection, was to do something like a European mount, which would involve processing the animal to allow it to macerate and collect the bones. This would mean creating a controlled environment where insects could process the soft tissues, but larger scavengers could not get to it. That's what we plan on doing with the other parts we're not using here. Then, being aware of the general idea of fluid preservation, I started doing some further research on that topic. The most common method these days is to use formalin, which is a formaldehyde solution of usually around 10% formaldehyde to 90% water, and sometimes other additives to prevent tissue decay and what they call autolysis or self-digestion. Then, after a long soak in formalin, the liquid is drained and replaced with another fixative meant for long-term storage, usually 70% isopropyl alcohol. I will not be using formalin, instead opting to only use 70% isopropyl. The debate comes from whether this is similarly effective, but I believe that's simply because there's not a lot of publicly available information on the subject. The other argument that can be made is if we were planning to ship any of these specimens, they can't be shipped in their fluid. I've got a bonus piece I'll show you later to serve as an example. In this case, formalin or a similar fixative would absolutely be recommended, but for our purposes, the isopropyl will be drained and replaced with more of the same in a few weeks or months, just to have them in a crystal clear fluid long term, but otherwise we have no intention of removing them from the liquid, so this is acceptable. The other reason I'm not using formalin is that it's a much more hazardous fluid to work with, and without proper need for it, there's no reason to deal with the possible hazard of using and disposing of it. From my understanding, many museums do without the fluid change entirely and only use isopropyl because in their use, the fluid is considered part of the specimen. Charles Darwin famously preserved many specimens in alcohol, and many of those are currently held by the Natural History Museum.
All right, Professor Fool. Thank you for the lecture.
Ah! Yeah, shut up, nerd.
Nobody asked you, Donnie. I quite enjoyed that. Please go on.
This is gross. I'm out, y'all.
Fine. Bye, Felicia. We'll be here having fun without you.
Alright, moving on. I've got this massive syringe, and I'm going to try to put as much isopropyl into the cavities of the head as I can. With the legs, there's not much meat on the bone, literally, for gases to get trapped in. With the head, however, you've got the mouth, sinus passages, and inside the cranium. If we were trying to preserve a whole specimen, we'd want to inject it about every inch in the meatier bits with as much fluid as possible. We would want it to almost look bloated. Now, as I said, I started processing the specimen from frozen, so my hope is that the isopropyl will help defrost it as we go and penetrate all the way into the cranium. The sinuses were pretty unobstructed. In an attempt to get isopropyl into the cranium, I'm gradually boring in through the tear duct, injecting more fluid as I go, and there's definitely less resistance as I get deeper, so I do believe it's defrosting the soft tissue in there. If you look at a goat's skull anatomy, you'll see that the inner eye socket is mostly bone, with a passage for presumably nerves and blood vessels to pass through the inner cranium. So I certainly penetrated as deeply as the needle could go, with some room for displacement around the syringe. I did this on both sides, so fingers crossed I was able to fill everything with iso. I'd say I probably put 300 or so milliliters of fluid into the cranium and sinus passage in total, but by the time I was done, the fluid was overflowing while I was pushing more in. I'm also sure to safely dispose of these syringes in these empty isopropyl containers and sealing them off. The tip of the first one got pretty bent and blunted in the process of making it into the head cavity. I'm pretty satisfied I've done everything I should have, so I'm going to fill the rest of the jar and temporarily seal it off with silicone. I say temporarily because, again, I plan on draining this fluid off in a few weeks or months, rinse everything, then refill the containers with more isopropyl. In the meantime, at least daily for the first week and every couple of days thereafter, I'm going to gently jostle the containers and tilt them to allow whatever little bubbles are there to escape to the top. This is a trick I learned from a mechanic buddy of mine. It's how he keeps RTV or caulk from solidifying in between use. You just put a screw in the nozzle. Works pretty well. and I'm going to do my best to get a good, consistent bead of silicone all the way around the outside of the lip of the jar. The last thing I want is for this seal to break while I'm tipping the jar. To remove the seal, I'll just cut it away and probably use resin to close it off again when I'm done. I carefully position the lid and gently set it onto the silicone, pressing down lightly to make a good seal, and then I'll set this stuff aside for a bit so I can pull out that bonus project I was talking about. I told you about the friend of the channel that gave us the goat. Well, she said something during our conversation about oddities along the lines of, it would be cool to have like a brain in a jar. So I went on, if you can believe it, Amazon, and found a formalin preserved sheep brain from a company that sells educational specimens, and decided to make her a gift in return for the goat. It came vacuum sealed in a small amount of formalin and also included a dissection guide, so that's pretty cool. The lid fitment on this piece is a little bit different than the one I used for the head, and I did end up with a small leak in the silicone that I had to fix later, but it's not a big deal. I also need to clean up the outside of the glass. There's a sticker that came off ugly and left paper and adhesive behind. I'll apply a final bead of silicone when I fix that. All in all, this was a pretty enjoyable project if I'm being honest. I was pretty nervous coming into it, but that fear turned out to be unfounded. It didn't take me a long time, I didn't run into any major snags, and in the end we were left with some keepsakes that memorialize the life of this creature. For me, this is what collecting oddities is really about. Capturing our curiosity, and in the case of a specimen like this, it's like giving it a second life. Preserved like this, the object in these jars can far outlive me and be appreciated by many generations to come. But that's the project completed. Thank you all for joining us. If you enjoyed watching, please like the video. We also haven't named her, so please comment what you think her name should be. And of course, subscribe or be cursed to always have your socks get wet. Without further ado, the final results.